you help clear out the cobwebs and let whatever comes forth be, the way you planned it. So many things that are floating around my head. I ask you to figure out what's important, pluck it out, and throw it out there. So, gosh, this week I had a really good time thinking about this this week. I discovered, and there's a write-up in the back in the sermon notes, and I want to apologize. I called Wyatt Walker Wade Wyatt, and I don't know why. It was an alliteration snafu or something, but Wyatt Walker is the Massachusetts Baptist minister that we'll be talking a little bit about today. So, I've been thinking about David and Goliath a lot lately because I think we're sort of a David. Our community's sort of a David. And I think we sometimes think we're supposed to be a Goliath. And that story keeps coming to me. And how David answered his call and embraced the gifts that he was given and the tools and the talents that he had in order to answer his call. So as tomorrow's Martin Luther King Day, I was thinking about civil rights, of course, and I was reading, and I stumbled on this book, ironically, called David and Goliath, and I wasn't thinking about reading anything about the Civil Rights Amendment or Martin Luther King. I started reading this book about a week and a half ago, and then this wonderful story came up about Wyatt Walker, and I was like, oh. Somebody asked the other day, what is discernment? What is the? And I mean, I've been talking about this weekly for a long time. But that's discernment. That discernment isn't something you do. It's the result of a whole lot of other stuff that you've already done. Right? It's being able to hear and see stuff that is always going on. God's always doing stuff, but we just can't see it and we don't get it because we're not speaking the language. We've got a lot of noise in our heads. And that's discernment is when you're able to listen as the result of some other stuff, prayer and spiritual practice, etc. So I was reading this book, and all of a sudden here comes this story of Wyatt Walker, and I'm like, that's the perfect story for Sunday. So we're all probably pretty familiar with Martin Luther King, and Dr. King was an amazing prophet. He was a fantastic preacher and a very inspirational speaker. He could really get people energized, but he didn't bring about civil rights act on his own. He had a lot of support, a lot of courageous people. One of those people was a nut job that I love this guy, because I always loved the lunatics. I always loved these guys who are outside the box. Was Wyatt Walker, who was a black Baptist minister from Massachusetts. It was one of Dr. King's chief strategists for a long time. And we had in Albany, which happened right before Birmingham, where everything kind of broke loose in Birmingham. Dr. King had gone to Albany and had spent 9 months there with his team, and nothing happened. Nothing happened because the chief of police, whose name was Pritchett, was a decent guy, and he treated Dr. King with respect. He had to arrest him a couple times, but rumor has it that he actually got somebody to bail Dr. King out. And they actually had this pretty neat relationship, and nothing was happening. The northern press was coming down expecting to see this big black and white clash. There was nothing going on. The police were laid back. They were letting people kind of do their thing, and it was boring. Nobody really was interested in what was going on. So after 9 months, the movement was starting to falter and starting to fail, and Dr. King left. And he was thinking, where am I going to go? Where can I go from here? This thing is starting to to fail. It was in the spring of 1963. Now, there's a joke that African Americans used to tell that wasn't really a joke. It's one of those jokes that's kind of true and not really a joke. And the joke is that a black man wakes up and tells his wife he's had a dream. And he says, Jesus told me to go to Birmingham. And his wife said, is Jesus going with you? And he said he'd go as far as Memphis. That's how bad Birmingham was. It was the most segregated. That was a hilarious joke, by the way. And you all stiffed me. It wasn't my joke. Malcolm Gladwell, I got it from actually, it was an old joke. And that's how bad it was. Nobody wanted to go to Birmingham. It was horrible. The violence was open. It was just really, it had several nicknames. It was called the Johannesburg of the South because of the incredible segregation. Now, Brown versus the Board of Education had passed in 1954, so segregation was illegal, but they still had it in full force in the Deep South. It was an awful city. It was also nicknamed Bombingham, because when a black family would try to move into a white neighborhood, they would inevitably, their house would be bombed. So it was not a good place. And what Dr. King needed was violence. He needed an overwhelming, in-your-face, violent response to a peaceful action. That's what he needed. So he calls in Wyatt Walker. Now, Dr. King was known as Mr. Leader, and in lighter moments as they would nickname him Lord, but that was in lighter moments. And he needed somebody with a different approach. He needed somebody to aggravate the leader of the Public Safety Commission, who was a really blatant racist named Bull Connor. Anybody nicknamed Bull is a little sketchy right off the top. But Bull Connor was just blatant in his love of segregation and racism. And Martin knew he really needed to antagonize this guy. Well, Bull Connor tried to play it. He tried to play it the way Chief Pritchard had played it in Albany, because it worked. He tried to lay back and do nothing. So he brought in Wyatt Walker. Now, Wyatt Walker's nickname was Brer Rabbit. Now, I don't know if you know of the African-American folktale of Brer Rabbit. There's a lot of great ones. Brer Rabbit was one of the slickest characters. He was known as one of the trickster heroes. The African-American community, they didn't have like Thor as a hero. They didn't have political power. They didn't have, so they had to be slick. So the heroes were smart, were clever, sometimes outsmarted somebody by pretending to be dumb. They did a lot of really ingenious, clever things. So Brer Rabbit was Wyatt Walker's nickname. Now, the most famous story about Brer Rabbit is Brer Fox really wanted to eat Brer Rabbit, and he couldn't catch him. Brer Rabbit was too fast. So he tricked him by making this doll that was coated with tar. And when Brer Rabbit got his hands on the doll, he couldn't get out of it, and the more he struggled, the worse it got. And Brer Fox caught him and was ready to eat him. And Brer Rabbit started screaming, "Do whatever you want. Eat me. Tear me apart. Do whatever you want to me, but don't throw me in that briar patch. Don't you dare throw me in that briar patch. Don't do it. Just kill me now, but don't put me in that briar patch." The briar patch was thorny and had rose thorns, and Brer Fox throws him in the briar patch. Well, of course, Brer Rabbit was raised in the briar patch. That's exactly what he wanted him to do, and he used the briars to remove the tar baby, and then he took a wood chip and combed the tar out of his fur. As Brer Fox got caught in the thorns and didn't have a very good time of it. So Brer Rabbit, like David, used the skills he had. He wasn't going to beat up Brer Fox. He's a rabbit, right? He used the skills he had. He was smart. He was fast. He could maneuver. And that's what he used. So Wyatt Walker is brought in to help Dr. King basically antagonize Bull Connor. And Wyatt Walker is known for pulling stunts, like he was with his family in Virginia, and it was a segregated town, and he went into the White Library and took out a book and got arrested. And as they were, photographing him get arrested, he showed proudly his biography of General Robert E. Lee book that he was trying to take out of the library. So he's sort of always sticking and doing little stunts. So when he got to Birmingham, he started making a lot of prank phone calls. And he'd call the Public Safety Commission and complain about, he wouldn't use the word black folks or African Americans. He'd drop the N-word and he'd say, hey, they're over here doing this. They're over here doing that. And of course there was nobody there. So Bull Connor was getting a little frustrated with this, and the police kept showing up, and there's nothing going on. And Wyatt Walker had mastered a variety of white Southern drawl accents. So he could do this and kept getting away with it. Then Wyatt Walker led a series of marches that didn't go anywhere. They would have a march and go in a circle. Or they'd go through an alley, through a store, and back out onto the street and in a square. And it was very frustrating. Now, he didn't tell Dr. King he was doing all this stuff, because Dr. King wouldn't have been cool with some of this. But that was who Wyatt Walker was. That was how God used him and the skills and the personality and who he was to serve a greater purpose. So eventually, and if you notice your programs, I don't know how well you can see the photo on the front, but that photo was taken on May 3rd, I believe, in 1963, and the movement was failing, and they went through a lot of actions to try to drum stuff up. People in Birmingham were terrified to even be seen with Dr. King, that they would lose their jobs, that they would lose their homes, that they would be brutalized. So it was hard to get things rolling. And they needed a photo that would blow the roof off of this, that would get the attention the movement required. So what you see on this front of this bulletin is an attack dog, right, a police dog, lunging at a young black man who was actually a sophomore in high school. He was 15 years old. He was a tall kid. And it looks like he's very passively kind of just standing there, and his arms limp at his right side, and he's just sort of chilling. He's not doing much. If you notice, the police officer has him by the shirt, and he's got the dog. And this photo is taken by Bill Hudson, and it was on the front page of many papers across the country, and really was the most famous photo of the civil rights movement. It got attention. They discussed it in Congress. They wanted it banned. They were like, this makes us look bad to our allies and people overseas. It makes us look bad in the world. We can't have this photo out. And this photo really helped to change the tide of the way things were going. And it was probably the major shift happened from this photo. Now what I'd like to point out in the photo is how the black folks in the photo don't seem to really care what's going on. Look at the people in the back. They're not even watching the action. They're like milling around, looking kind of bored. Now, the young man in the photo, his name is Walter Gadsden. He wasn't even a protester. He was there checking it out. His parents actually owned two conservative black papers that were throwing MLK under the bus. And he kind of went down to check it out. A lot of high school kids had skipped school and gone to check this out. And if you notice, his left hand is actually on the arm of the police officer. And if you look at his left leg, it's raised. Walter is actually kicking the police dog, and it supposedly broke his jaw. The police officer is holding the dog back. And if you look at Walter Gadsden, he's not passive. He's holding that hand to get a stronger kick. That's Brer Rabbit. The photo is a lie that tells the truth. The photo was orchestrated. And I have to tell you, this is a little bit disturbing, but it speaks to who Wyatt Walker was. He was desperately trying to get something like this going. And when Bull Connor ordered the water cannons, that helped, but it wasn't enough. And then Bull Connor started talking about how they're never going to allow these so-and-sos to get to City Hall. They're never going to let them get to City Hall. And Wyatt Walker thought, you know, if we can get close to City Hall, we can tip his hand. We can get him to show who he really is to the world. That's what Dr. King kept asking. How are we going to tip his hand? How are we going to get him to tip his hand? So Wyatt Walker heard about these police dogs, and Bull Connor was bragging that we've got 100 police dogs, and I want him to see them work. So Wyatt Walker orchestrated some stuff through the local radio station, and they were telling the high school kids, skip school and come down. And on one day, 600 kids got arrested. The next day, 1,500 kids showed up, and they were just filling the paddy wagons. They were just walking right into the paddy wagons. And the jails were all full, so no one else could be arrested. So they had to stop these guys from getting to City Hall by whatever means necessary, because that was important to Bull Connor. They couldn't arrest anybody else. The jails were full. You know, and some folks were like, hey man, you're getting kids arrested. That isn't cool. But they used what they had. They did what they had to do for a higher purpose, for a higher goal. But when Wyatt Walker heard that they had the police dogs out, and the police dogs were being directed toward the children, Wyatt Walker jumped in the air for joy. He started jumping up and down when he heard they had attack dogs where the children were. And the minister who was with him thought he was out of his mind. He was like, what are you, nuts? He saw a higher vision. Of course he didn't want anybody to get bit by a dog. These kids have been bit by plenty of dogs for no reason. But he jumped for joy that Bull Connor had tipped his hand, and this photo is some of the best Brer Rabbit work probably in history. Now, a lot of people did get bit by dogs. A lot of people did get beaten. Those fire hoses tore the clothes off people and whipped kids in the walls. But this is the photo that actually broke that free. And it happened because Wyatt Walker was doing what he was called to do, what he was good at. He was called to agitate a racist commissioner into showing what it's really like. And maybe I'm just a theological dork, but that made me think of David. I really understood why the author put these two stories together. You know, David wasn't going to put on Goliath's armor and come out with his head. He wasn't going to come out alive. He wasn't going to win. In the African American movement, it wasn't going to win playing by the rules of the establishment. So that always leads us to thinking about, how is God calling us? What is God calling us to be and do? Are we so entrenched with the idea that there's one way to do things, and it's to put on that 100-pound armor? Or can we let God inspire us to travel light like David, to use what tools we do have? And we have a lot of people with a lot of skills and tools and gifts, in this community and in the wider community. I felt really blessed to have the folks from Uncommon Ground participate with us in the longest night service. There's some wonderful folks there doing some good work, and we got to work together on that. Holy One, we thank you for these wonderful stories, for these courageous characters, these clever characters who find a way to get your will done in spite of the way things are, who find a way to bring your light and peace and love and healing and wisdom to the world in spite of us mostly kicking and screaming. We ask that you bless us to be a channel for that peace and light, and to embrace who we are, who you wove us to be, who you created us to be. We appreciate that you take wacky alcoholic poker players and put a robe on them in front of folks and say, hey, tell a story. We appreciate the curveballs, and that you keep us moving and guessing, and we just ask that you help us to see what you're up to. Help us to see that next right thing that you're calling us to do, individually and as a community. We know that guidance is always there, that discernment is always there. Help us to see, help us to hear and to be aware of what it is you're calling us to do, who it is you're calling us to be. We ask you to do this in Jesus' name.